And we're live. Hoping this connection holds out well. My internet has been very, very not great lately. I guess, well, we're notifying people. I'll just keep talking until people show up. I guess if it looks really choppy on your end, you can always just kind of catch this later when I post it to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/user/George Olympians. Normally the videos that go up there look a lot better because they're being recorded directly into my phone because sometimes stuff's really choppy. I don't know what to say. There's so much bandwidth right now, like that's being used. There's so many people doing things like this. I think there's just a lot more people online at this time of day than there normally would be. So it's been a little bit hairy. So I hope everyone's having a good time, having a good day. My name is George O'Connor. This is a series that I'll be honest, I really haven't settled to definitively on a name. Sometimes it's called, Greek Speak. Sometimes it's called Geek Speak, and I cross out the R. It's kind of clever. I've been really leaning towards Geek Speaks Greek recently, even though you'll notice I'm actually speaking English, American English to be specific. So none of those titles really work. Geek Speaks Greek is fun. The reason I call this show Greek Speaks Geek is because, again, my name is George O'Connor. I am an author and illustrator. I am best known for writing and illustrating the comic book series / graphic novel series, if you want to be fancy, Olympians, which retells classic Greek myth in in graphic novel form. So I'm talking Greek myth, so it's like I'm speaking Greek myth. It just kind of ruins the whole rhyme, Geek speaks Greek myth. I don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'll give it maybe another second or two before going to stuff. Normally, I like to start off by sharing drawings that people have sent in to me. And while I do have quite a bit of drawings from previous episodes, other mythological personages we've covered, I do have a lot to share. Currently, my iPad is doing double duty, typing an episode I filmed yesterday. Yesterday, there was no Geek Speak Greek. What I did instead was I've been working with this bookstore. I've been trying to help them out in this hard time. Word Bookstore here in Brooklyn. There's also another Word in Jersey. And yesterday I interviewed my good friend Ian Lendler about his book, The First Dinosaur, on Word. So we had a talk. My other love besides Greek mythology is dinosaurs, so it was pretty great. This is the story, not of the first ever dinosaur, like way back in the Triassic. This is a book about the story of how humankind discovered dinosaurs. And because there was a time, for most of our history, we didn't know about dinosaurs. We knew about all these big mythological monsters, but then, when did we discover dinosaurs? And it's like, oh my gosh, the mythological monsters are real. And that's as good a segue as any. So today, on this episode of Geek Speaks Greek, I'm going to talk about some mythological monsters. When I first started this series, there was a lot of talking about goddesses and gods, and then we branched into heroes. And I think it was like last Friday, I did my first ever official monster talk. And that was about Medusa, the Gorgon. And that was very well received. People were very excited. So after a couple of loose fit episodes earlier this week, where I just took questions and answers, today I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about Cyclopes. So right off the bat, let's just get that straight. When you're talking about we all know what a Cyclops is. Big one-eyed creature, monster, giant normally. When you're talking about a group of more than one Cyclops, I was trying to figure a way to say it. It's not Cyclopses, which you would figure it would be. It's Cyclopes. Sometimes words pluralize funny. So, just a little thing I'm trying to get out there in the world so people stop saying Cyclopses. Like, I went to the store and there was just so many Cyclopses around. I mean, probably nobody ever says that anyway. So Cyclopes. The name, let's just also establish this. You would think the name means one eye, right? That would make a lot of sense. Turns out the name actually means round eye or circle eye, or I've even heard wheel eye, which all things are round. And so it doesn't actually specify only one eye, which is really interesting because sometimes, especially when you go back to ancient Greek art, nowadays we're pretty much like, oh yeah, we know what a cyclops looks like. It's got one eye. Sometimes in older depictions of art, you'll actually see them with two eyes just like we have, but one round eye in the center of the forehead. Because if you read carefully the accounts, they don't really necessarily, most myths don't specify they only have one eye. So it's not uncommon to see this three-eyed Cyclops, like a Triclops. Shout out to all my Masters of the Universe fans who get what I'm talking about there. Now, throughout mythology, there has been many different Cyclopes. I was kind of doing a tabulation in my head before this started, and I could think of at least 3 different types, we'll call them species, of Cyclopes in Greek mythology. And so what I thought I would do is I would kind of address all these different Cyclopes, okay? How many times everyone's gonna be like, stop saying Cyclopes. The first species of Cyclopes, of one-eyed giants, is the ones that we meet in Hesiod's Theogony. And this is the original 3 Cyclopes. They are uncles to the Olympians. They are brothers to the Titans. When the first goddess, Gaia, created Uranos and took him as her husband, right? They had children together. And the children of Gaia and Uranos were the Titans, and there were 12 in number. There was 6 boys, 6 girls, well, 6 Titans, 6 Titanesses. And then there was 3 Hecatoncheires. The Hecatoncheires were giants who had 50 heads and 100 hands. And then there was 3 Cyclopes. And their names were Brontis, Steropis, and Argus. And those names mean, Brontis means thunder. Like Brontosaurus, thunder lizard, get it? So that's one aspect, right? Steropis means lightning bolt. And Argus, this is a little bit hard to grasp, means like lightning flash. And you might be like, what's the difference between Steropis and Argus, a lightning bolt and a lightning flash? The way I think is this, like we've all been, not hopefully out in the middle of storms, we've all been through thunderstorms, right? Or lightning storms. When you see like that jagged line that cuts through the sky, that would be a lightning bolt. But when you see that bright flash, just where it goes off somewhere, that's the flash. And it makes a lot of sense to me that they would actually make that distinction. I think, sometimes like another group of people, an ancient group of people, will just look at something that's kind of everyday and just have a different take on it. And this is one of those things. I'm like, yeah, why don't we make a distinction? Because there's definitely jagged lightning bolts and there's definitely flash lightning bolts. I get it. So anyway, that's interesting, right? All 3 of them have names related to storms. So they kind of join this like pantheon within the pantheon of gods who are related, or monsters who are related to storms. Of course, Zeus, king of the gods, very famously is the god of the sky, god of storms, right? And then there's Brontis, Argus, and Steropis. Then there's also Typhon, who I feel like I mention every episode. Somebody asks me, who's your favorite monster? I'm like, Typhon. I mean, his name is very close to typhoon. He is an embodiment of a giant storm. He's a huge storm monster. And makes sense, there'd be, we see this a lot in ancient Greek religion and mythology. They ascribe multiple characters to cover certain things, like the way there's 2 gods of fire, Hestia and Hephaestus, or 2 gods of war, Ares and Athena. It's not uncommon for something that's very large to have multiple deities covering any aspects of it. And in the case of storms, I mean, you're like, imagine, you're just like, you don't know what's really causing this. You're like, is it the king of the gods? Is it a bunch of monsters? Now, there's actually there's a direct connection in myth beyond the fact that the Cyclopes, the Brontis, Argus, Steropis, are uncles to Zeus. So, and it's something you actually see in my book, Zeus. They figure rather prominently in this story. In fact, you can even see one of my drawings of one of them there. That's one of the original Cyclopes. Which one is it? Who knows? But they are, in many sources, are credited as making Zeus's thunderbolts for him. In fact, the Cyclopes, they're very gifted craftsmen. They're kind of like take the role of the forge gods before there's an Hephaestus. They're very gifted, and they make the weapons for like all of the first generation gods. So the trident of Poseidon, it's from the Cyclopes. The helmet of invisibility from Hades, it's from the Cyclopes. And Zeus's lightning. Now, some myths make it sound almost like they sit there banging on making lightning bolts that he just throws away all the time. In my story, I choose it like more like they're actually holding the energy in for him. I'm going to show you a panel, actually, where Zeus makes this travel down to the underworld where he meets the Cyclopes, and they've been storing this electricity, and they actually shoot it into his body, kind of almost electrocuting him, but he's a god, so it doesn't kill him. I'm going to take a moment just to draw, since I've shown pictures of them, these Cyclopes, the original Cyclopes. It's kind of the easiest drawings I have. And at this point, I kind of took that name, the round eye, very literally. They have one big round eye. He's got an eyebrow creasing down over it, so it's not perfectly round. I feel like at this point, I need to mention the Cyclops elephant connection. And what is that? Well, there's this theory. It's a very neat theory. I'm not 100% sure I buy it because it's so neat. Anything that works this well is often wrong, it seems. But there's this theory that the ancient Greeks came up with the idea of Cyclopes because they kept finding the skulls of mastodons. And this was at a time, I guess, before they had gotten to the African continent or further into the Indian continent and seen actual elephants. So they find these enormous bones and these weird skulls, right? And if you've never seen an elephant, you're going to find this giant skull with huge tusks, right? And this enormous socket right in the middle of it. And that enormous socket is where its trunk attaches. But if you've never seen an elephant, that's going to be the last thing you expect. Because, like, what other animal has a trunk? I mean, kind of maybe a tapir in South America, and they're not even going to see those, of course. So that's just, like, such a weird thing. They would find these enormous bones and the skulls. And they're like, there must have been a race of one-eyed giants. And it does really work really well, right? So I wanted to pay a little bit of an homage to that. So when I drew my Cyclopes, I gave them a few elephantine features. They have this thick, coarse, wrinkly, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's gray skin. There's not too many green elephants, but you bring color in where you can. And the biggest clue about them is their legs. I mean, I just straight up draw elephant feet. Now there's another cool thing about this. This is a personal cool thing. I've drawn all my life. I didn't start off drawing good, but you draw every day, you get pretty good at it. I used to draw a lot with my parents when I was a little kid. And when I was little, I would sometimes, like, my dad would draw next to me. And there was this one day, it was this really momentous day, for whatever reason stood out to me. We designed 4 monsters together. And there was, like, this one dude who had, like, his head was a cannon and he could shoot his brain at it too, which, like, good trick, you could do it once. There was, like, a big, like, kind of Godzilla-looking guy. There was a guy with, like, bat wings. And the 4th one was this dude. He looked a bit different back then. He used to be skinnier. Instead of having claws that looked like this, his claws were lobster claws. And his feet he wasn't quite as stocky yet. He was just in general skinnier. But it was this weird, like, proto-Cyclops that I designed. And it was a drawing that was always so vivid to me. It was such an important memory, drawing this with my dad when I was little, that I kept drawing this guy throughout my life. And he'd be refined. And at one point, it was like in my high school years when I would just doodle this guy. I wasn't doing anything serious with him. He would just be in, like, the side of my notebooks. Like, sometimes I'd draw him holding up a box, like, put A here on my homework, and I'd get a B because I was drawing pictures instead of getting homework. At some point, I actually, instead of drawing his hands as lobster claws, I drew them as electric plugs, which is a cool bit of synchronicity, electricity, because I wasn't actually thinking yet about how this would be Brontes, Argus, and Steropus. I just thought it was just a funny look. But, like, now, if he's the guy that's been storing the power for Zeus, it's kind of a cool thing. If you look, even the way his fingers look now, they kind of have, like, a little bit of maybe I'm stretching it, but there's a little bit of a plug quality there. I don't know. So, one of my oldest characters, one of the first things I have ever been drawing, and it finally found this place in my books, which was pretty exciting. And they play this role. They create the weapons for the gods. Now, I said there's, like, at least 3 types. This one I'm not sure to qualify. I think this counts as a different species. Brontes, Argus, and Steropus had kids. I don't know who had which. I probably should have looked this up beforehand. But there were at least 4 other Cyclopes that were born. A lesser generation, I guess. And they are Elatrius, Euryalus, Tracheus, and Halomedes. And I don't remember what any of those names mean, except for Euryalus. If you were here for the Gorgon talk, we talked about Euryale, which is one of the Gorgons, which means wide stepping, and people really liked when I did that. So his name was, like, wide stepping. So I guess wide stepping means huge, maybe? I don't know. These were 4 Cyclopes, just like Argus and Steropus and Brontes. But there was a big, big difference. These dudes are like the Olympians or the Titans, or I guess the Hecatoncres. Immortal. You cannot kill them. There's no way to kill them. You can imprison them, you could do terrible things to them, but it's just impossible to kill Brontes, Argus, and Steropes. Unfortunately for Halomedes, Euryalus, Elatrius, and I keep forgetting the other guy's name, Tracheus, they're not immortal. They all work in the shop with Hephaestus the smith god. We know they're good at making things. They made the trident, they made the helmet, they even made Cryosaur, the golden blade that Demeter uses. But their 4 sons work there in the forge too. And the reason we know that they are not immortal is because Apollo kills them. Yeah, it's, this is one of those stories that makes Apollo look bad, which we come up with this a lot. And we don't really get to see much of this second generation of Cyclopes. In fact, I think they only appear maybe in this one panel. And look, they're like skinny and they're gawky. They're like the kids. They're like, oh, they're like these guys, but like skinny, and they're little, and they're like, oh, gee, like, whoa. They're like teenagers. They're like, oh, I sure hope that girl I asked out likes me or whatever. And, it's really sad because Apollo goes on a bit of a rampage. It's a long story, which I didn't get into at the Asclepius episode, which I'll have to do something. Apollo's son, Asclepius, the god of healing, creates a huge sin against nature and brings a man back to life. You're not supposed to do it. It's one of those rules. Like, no, you die. I'm sorry, you're mortal. That's the difference. He brings this man back to life. And Zeus, whose job, he doesn't have very many responsibilities he has to enforce. He has to enforce the natural order. And so he kills Asclepius. And Apollo is grief-stricken. And he acts out. And we see this happen a lot with the gods. They're very limited in the revenges they can take on each other because they are immortal, because they can't be killed. And so what does he do? Apollo goes down the list of people who he can hurt that matter to Zeus. And he realizes the Cyclopes gave Zeus his electricity. And so he goes to the workshop of Hephaestus and he murders the 4 Cyclopes' sons, Halomedes, Tracheus, Euryalus, and Elatrius. And it's a pretty sad story. I'm not going to draw a picture of them because it's just like that. It's like sad. It's a bummer. So I guess that counts as a second species or second type of Cyclops. Man, this is hard, guys. And then there is another type. Probably, I would argue, the most famous of all Cyclopses, as long as you don't count Scott Summers from the X-Men. It is Polyphemus. Now, Polyphemus, he's definitely of a different stock than these guys. Brontes, Argus, Steropes, children of Gaia and Uranus. Polyphemus is the son of the sea god Poseidon and the sea goddess Thoosa. Or Taosa, perhaps. And he is a very different temperament, too. I went very literal with my depictions of them. The name means round eye. The only facial feature they have is a round eye. But Polyphemus, his most famous story, is in the Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, which is the story of Odysseus' travel home after the Trojan War and all the different tragedies that befall him en route, he comes onto this island. He and his men go exploring into this deserted cave, what they think is a deserted cave. There's all this like cheese and stuff there, like, ooh, let's take this. And suddenly the owner comes home, and he is this giant, brutish monster. And he sees the men. They've been hiding. Odysseus tries to smooth talk his way out, as is his wont, but it doesn't work. And this huge monster, Polyphemus, he rolls a boulder over the front of the cave, trapping the men inside, and starts eating them. He keeps them as like they're in a pantry. He slowly, each day, I think it's like groups of 3. It's a really scary and nightmarish section. It's probably the most famous part of the Odyssey. In fact, it is a part that I retold in Poseidon because it's such a gripping part and because of Polyphemus' connection to Poseidon. I draw Polyphemus very, very different than I do the other Cyclopes. And there's a big reason for that. He eats people. These guys have no mouth. I mean, I guess they could stuck him in their tear ducts or something, but that would be really weird looking. So when I designed Polyphemus, I'm like, he's a totally different familial line. He's just a different beast altogether. but I still wanted to have that elephant connection, that idea that they were discovering mastodon skulls. So when I designed Polyphemus's face, I actually went to the museum and drew some pictures of elephant skulls. So his face is very much like I just took an elephant skull, and instead of there being a big trunk in it, I stuck a big eye in the middle. So here's my drawing of Polyphemus. Got to start with the eye. And then give him like a kind of slit, like ape-like nose. He has tusks. They're not as big as they could have been, because elephants have some enormous tusks. That looks really silly. But I gave him definite tusks. And he's got these big, jagged teeth. Elephants and mastodons, their ancestors, have these really interesting teeth. I think they call them batteries, where they're these enormous, flat, grinding teeth. And it looks like something, it's designed for chewing up coarse fibers and plants and stuff. Like, an elephant can eat a tree. But, like, I mean, if you picture that same thing eating a person, it's like, it's gruesome. He has a bit of a domed head. Gave him a little bit of a beard. It's because elephants, they do have hair. I don't remember how I drew their ears. I think I gave them, like, just kind of small ears. I mean, by elephant standards, at least. And then, of course, I gave him just an enormous, hulking body. With, like, little hairs sticking off here and there. Oh, you know what? I think he had some male pattern baldness, too. I think he had a little bit of hair there. Now, if you take a look at this picture I just scribbled out for a second, really, here. If you just imagine, right here, let's put little two bumps. Let's just a little shadow there. Pretend that's eyes. And pretend instead there was just a big trunk coming out here. You could see how that's just an elephant skull. So I tried to keep that, like, that bit together, that he's got this elephantine predecessor, in the idea that that's how they created him. Now, his most famous myth is the myth where he eats all of Odysseus' sailors. Very famously, Odysseus eventually does outwit him. They spend all day, he goes out and he takes care of his, like, enormous sheep, and he comes back and eats people at night. And one day when he's out, Odysseus' men, they find a log in the cave, and they sharpen it and they harden it in the wood so it's, like, super hard. And then they had brought some wine with them as a gift, and it's, like, really concentrated wine. Like, it's like each, like, glass was like 6 bottles worth. It was, like, thick, gross wine. Wine's disgusting anyway, but, like, this is really gross wine. And he, like, gets Polyphemus drunk. And he goes, and Polyphemus is like, oh, it's just some good wine, bring me some more. And he drinks, like, the equivalent of, like, 900 bottles or something insane. And even though he's huge, he's drunk. He's like, doesn't know what's going on. And he's like, what's your name, little man, who I keep beating all your friends? And Odysseus is like, my name is No Man. And he's like, okay, No Man, I'm going to eat you last. And he passes out because he's so drunk, right? He's sitting there snoring, and while he's asleep, Odysseus and the remaining soldiers take this log, and they jam it into his eye. And he's blinded. He wakes up screaming. It's like, ah! And this is a weird part. I don't really have an explanation for this. So this is perhaps a 4th type of Cyclops. We know very much his parentage. Poseidon, Thoosa, they had a kid. The kid's weird looking. He has one eye. Who cares? That's his thing. He lives on an island. He's grumpy. Eats people. In Homer, in the Odyssey, they mention there's other Cyclopes on the island, but we don't know who they are. I have a theory. I'll share it at the end. They come. They're like, everything okay in there, Polyphemus? You're screaming. And he's all like, no man's blinded me. No man is killing me. And they're like, well, good. I'm glad to hear that nobody's doing that. And they leave. And it's like this kind of trick. And it's like, it's a great bit of a story. I mean, I tell it in Poseidon. It's very fun. Who are those other Cyclopes? It's probably not Brontes, Argus, and Stidopus, because they're working in the Forge of Hephaestus. Who are these other dudes? Now, this is the 4th and final version of Cyclopes. Cyclops? Man, I don't know. I gotta work on my pluralizations. That I will talk about today. There is... Oh, I didn't mention... there's a story I wanted to tell really quickly. I want to tell a story. There's this really cool story I haven't mentioned briefly. He's not always just a bad guy, although he kind of is a bad guy. Ovid, the Roman fabulist, who's like one of the best sources for Greek mythology. He wrote this really cool story. It comes from ancient Greek sources, but I really like his version, where Polyphemus, whose name means many words, Polyphemus is in love with this nymph named Galatea. And he spends all this time making a song for her, and he's serenading her and stuff, and he catches her, and she doesn't love him because he's a big, gross monster. She's in love with this guy named Acis. And like this is kind of like, I view this as his origin story. This is why he becomes a grump. And he's just like, who's this guy? She's like, I don't know, he's good looking. I don't care. You're a big ugly monster. So he picks up this giant rock and he smashes Acis. And the blood of Acis creates the river Acis, which is the story for it. It's a weird story. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I have it in Poseidon somewhere. It's been a while since I've read that book. So who were these other Cyclopes? Let me get back on track. We don't know. But my theory, the ancient Greeks believed in a lot of different, what we would call mythical races of people. We talked yesterday during one of the Q&As, we talked a lot about the Amazons, a race of warrior women who were feared throughout Greece. And there's actually a lot of historical evidence that they may have been real. I'll do an episode on Amazons one day because that's some fascinating stuff. But there's other groups of people that are less known, and there's ones that are super well known. We all know about satyrs, we know about centaurs. But then there is this one group of people, they were called the Arimaspians. And I feel like they lived, I forget where, should look this up again. I feel like they lived in what is today like considered like Syria, because I know that they were best known for, like, they lived in an area where there's a lot of gold and they would fight the griffins for the gold. And I definitely think the griffins were from like in Syria. So that makes some sense to me. So I'll say Syria, but like somebody who's a classics major is like, actually but whatever. And the Arimaspians were a mythical race of people with one eye. So it wasn't this weird kind of like one-off child of Poseidon. It wasn't Brontes, Argus, and Steropus who were like the children of Gaia, very notable. It wasn't their kids because unfortunately Apollo, all them. But the Arimaspians were an entire race, an entire tribe, if you were, of one-eyed people. So in my theory, perhaps, and this would be my fourth, putting it forward, perhaps that those other Cyclopes on the island were like Arimaspian colonists who like had moved out. They're like, we want to see the rest of the world. Let's live on this scary island with this giant Cyclops that eats people. I don't know. I mean, let me know if you think that theory works. It works for me. So, I think, looking to the side of my poster, I have a poster here, so it always helps me remember. I think that's pretty much all I really wanted to cover about Cyclopes today and the various types of Cyclopes. If you have any questions, I would love to take your questions. This is normally part I throw it open for that. Just to let people know, I am doing this solo today. So if you ask questions earlier, you probably want to repeat them. Normally, super assistant Nicole is here, and she's jotting stuff down so we get a backlog. Just me today. Sorry, folks. So I'll keep talking a little bit while you have some questions. Let me see if anybody, I'll scroll up and see if there was any questions there. Why does he kill them? What are the Cyclops' four sons' names? I said that. But just to, can I explain Athena coming out of Zeus's head? I definitely go into that a little bit in, a lot in the Athena book. And so Athena is, a lot of times people think that she's born completely from Zeus, and that's definitely not the case. She has a mother. Her name was Metis. Metis, her name just means thought. She was the Titaness. No, actually, she's not a Titan. She's an Oceanity. She's a daughter of Oceanus the Titan. So she's like a next generation. She was like the goddess of thought. And she was Zeus's first wife before Hera. And there was a curse placed on her by Mother Earth herself, Gaia, who was like, if you two have a kid together, that kid's going to grow up to overthrow Zeus as king of the gods, because we see this in the myths a lot. There's this, there's always generations supplanting each other. Uranus is overthrown by Kronos. Kronos is overthrown by Zeus. Who's going to overthrow Zeus? Maybe this one. So Zeus doesn't want to be overthrown because he's like, I have a cool job. He tricks Metis into turning herself into a fly. Or in my book, I make it a dragonfly because I didn't feel like drawing a gross fly. And she swallows him. He swallows her. And here's the thing, she's already pregnant. She gives birth inside Zeus's head. And for like 16 years, she and Athena live in Zeus's head. And so he's like, he doesn't know. He hears this voice in his head times like, shut up, voice in my head, I do what I want. But like the whole time, this child is growing up inside his brain and in his thoughts. And she learns more about Zeus than Zeus knows himself because she lives inside his thoughts. And then finally, when she's about 16, like I said, as she comes of age, the headache, the pressure of having these two goddesses in his head is too much to Zeus. And he goes to his son Hephaestus, and he's like, Hephaestus, you gotta do something about this. And Hephaestus is like, yeah, I'll split your head open. And they hold him down. He takes a spike of adamantine, a huge hammer. He's like, boom! They blow Zeus's head apart, and out jumps Athena. And that's the story of how she comes out of his head. It's a weird story, but it's a fun one to retell. Do Cyclopes have poor depth perception? It is reasonable to assume, because the reason we have depth perception is we have two eyes. They create a stereoscopic vision, and there's an overlapping of forms that lets us tell depth, right? So Cyclopes, they only have one eye. So I assume Cyclopes are constantly walking into walls, constantly stepping on smaller people, falling down stairs, bumping their heads on low things. I mean, yeah, there's probably just a mess. There's a reason why they like to hang around underground in the forge with Hephaestus, because like if they like go outside and like, I keep tripping over stuff, it's just terrible. Scroll up, I'm being told. Cyclopes Greek or Cyclops X-Men? Are you asking me which I like better? Or who would win in a fight? Okay, I'm going to put on my new different nerd hat. I'm actually a big superhero fan too. Cyclops of the X-Men is also known as Scott Summer. He is, I think, the second. Jean Grey is the first X-Men recruited by Professor Charles Xavier. Scott Summers is at an orphanage in, I think, Nebraska or maybe Oklahoma, and he's got these bad headaches. He shoots these eye beams out one day. They discover putting red quartz lenses control these eye beams, and so he's constantly shooting these eye beams of concussive force. There's a whole argument whether or not they heat up or not, but this power pushing out of his head all the time. The only thing that could stop it is closing his eyes or the ruby quartz. Meanwhile, the Cyclopes, Brontostropus, and Argus are giant storm monsters, immortal, able to lift up mountains, crush through the earth, throw lightning bolts. I say they win. That's just me. I don't think, maybe, none of the X-Men could stand against a god. Maybe Phoenix, maybe. What else do we got here? How did Zeus fix his head then after the thing? Gods' real physical forms are like balls of energy. I talk about this in some of the other episodes. You're going to see it in my book Dionysus. You actually see what a god really looks like. So the human forms they wear are just forms. They don't really have organs the way that we do and stuff. It doesn't really matter. So Zeus's head splitting open is like, I mean, he's got people living in his head already. So clearly there's not a brain there the way we think of it. So he's just like, his head splits open. This goddess jumps out and he's like, oh. And I always do is like a shoomph, like his head comes back together and he's like, look everybody, look what I made. And so, yeah, I just think he can heal himself. The one instance where you can see, I don't have the book right offhand, where I actually have one of the gods healing themselves. It's in the book Ares. And Ares has just been, basically Athena snookered him on the battlefield. And she was invisible. And she had one of the Greek heroes. She took his spear and stabbed Ares right through his chest. And it hurts him. Like he screams. And he goes up to Olympus and he's got like this like spear through him. And he's got like just, they don't have blood. They have this stuff called ichor. It's like golden. Just pouring out of him. It's making this mess, right? And he's all like, look what she did to me. I have a hole in me. And Zeus is like, first Zeus tells him he hates him, which is just not nice. But then he's just like, just heal yourself. And the description, if you read in the original Odyssey, they describe it like it fizzes. It's sort of like, I mean, they don't say like an Alka-Seltzer because that was invented yet, but that's how I envisioned it. Like, Ares is like, oh yeah, and it just fizzes and it's gone. So their bodies, they can be wounded, I guess, but it just doesn't really matter. Like you cut off a god's head. I don't think there's a myth where you cut off a god's head. But I bet you could cut off a god's head and they'd be like, hey, put my head back on, please. Okay. Let's see. Shiloh would know why the Cyclopes don't get hurt by the lightning they are holding onto for Zeus. Hi, Shiloh. So, the way I mean, there's a couple of reasons. The reason the Cyclopes aren't hurt by the lightning is because they are like, well, they've been entrusted with caring for it for him, right? Like it's their job to hold on to it. I envision them, oh, it's already there. I envision them as being like batteries. And they kind of like, like I said, they have the outlet hands. They're very stocky. So basically, Zeus was fated to have this electricity power, right? But I joke about this elsewhere, but it's so true. He's a shape-shifting, incredibly strong, immortal baby when he's born. Imagine he was electric too. So like he's like crying, he turns into a donkey, he has a temper tantrum, he's like hitting the ground, everything's collapsing, and he's shooting lightning bolts. Like no one would be able to change his diaper. It'd be a horror show. So, very wisely, Mother Earth, who bequeathed these powers onto him, says, you know what, somebody else hold on to these until he's old enough. So it actually becomes part of Zeus's journey, like his heroic journey, so to speak. There's a thing called the hero's journey. There's certain tropes you see play out in mythologies and other stories like Star Wars and things, where a character goes through certain steps to become a hero, what we call a hero. And one of the things that happens a lot is they make a journey to the underworld. Zeus makes his journey to the underworld, and you're transformed by this experience. It always has an effect, and that's where he gains electricity powers. So it's like these giant battery dudes were holding the electricity, and they gave it to Zeus. So they must be made of a conductive metal or something, I guess, if we want to get scientific about it. Can you explain the Hecate, please? My best this so many times. Didn't mean that. Do you want me to explain Hecate? Hecate is a goddess, right? She is a goddess that people really like her, despite her not having a huge appearance in myth. I talked about this elsewhere. I feel like one of the reasons she doesn't appear in myth that much is because she has a lot of overlapping characteristics with Hermes. She is a goddess of the crossroads. She's a goddess of boundaries, which are both two of his attributes. And she's also a goddess of magic, which is also another attribute of his. And magic is interesting, because a lot of what we talk about the gods could be construed as magic, but it's a certain type of ritual and divination and things like this. She and Hermes both had this sort of thing. Additionally, she's referred to as a tripartite goddess. When you would see her in art, she would often be depicted as having 3 separate faces. And as a joke, I don't have her book nearby, or I'd grab it to show you. Whenever I show her, she really only appears so far in Hades, though she will be appearing in the final book, Dionysus. I always draw her 3 panels, but I see someone just added, and I think this is probably right. Maybe you're not asking about Hecate, but you're asking about the Hecatoncheires? So that's Hecate really quickly. Hecate, her symbols are torches, because she's this goddess of travel as well. I'll do an episode on Hecate because I have a lot to say about her. Interestingly, she plays a bigger part almost in Shakespeare than she does in Greek mythology. The Hecatoncheires are brothers to these dudes, to the Cyclopes and to the Titans. And there's not much to explain to them except for the fact that they are monstrous. Monstrous in the fact that the Titans, by whatever way, came out vaguely humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, head up top, shoulders, waist, all that jazz. These guys kind of humanoid too, arms, legs, head, no, but just the eyes. So they don't look human. And that's important because Kronos didn't like that. Kronos was the king of the Titans. And the Hecatoncheires were even worse. So take this general frame, the stocky frame, right? I even draw them with the same elephant feet, I think. I don't know, maybe you don't see their toes. They have elephant feet. Check in the book, I don't remember. Instead of 1 eye, they actually have 100 eyes because they have 50 heads. So the Hecatoncheires, the way I draw them, it looks like a cluster of little pimples almost with little faces. It's just this mass of heads. And then they have 100 hands. I've seen people draw them where they have 100 different arms, and it looks kind of weird, almost like they have, because the arms have to be really skinny to fit there. So it's there's this huge monster with these little skinny arms. I went a different route. I kind of made my Hecatoncheires look a little bit fractal. You see them a little bit here. There's the heads. It's all their mouths screaming. And then their hands have other hands, their fingers. Each of their fingers is a hand. So I think they actually have 10 sets of arms, but each of the fingers on each of those hands is another set of hands, getting to the 50. So, but they're cool creatures. Now, their names are... Gonna look at the book because I'm blanking on it right now. I hate when this happens. It makes me look bad. Oh yes, Varieties, Gaius, and Kotos. They are not... Now, there's a pretty easy parallel to draw between the fact that these guys are storm gods. We could see it because their names are Thunder, Lightning, and Lightning Bolt. The other names of Gaius, Kotos, and Varieties, their names mean... I don't remember them specifically. I know it means stuff like brawn and power. They're just embodiments of just power. And they're so strong... There's really only one other instance where they appear. It's not for lack of... They're some of my favorite designs that I came up with. They're very hard to draw because there's so many heads. But there is this one myth. It's a really unusual myth where Zeus himself is chained up in adamantine chains. He's overthrown by Poseidon, Athena, and Hera. And then he's saved by... You turn the page... Maybe turn the page if you can. I believe it's Biarios who does it. When the Hecatonchires. So check out this giant dude, this monster. He's so powerful. He grabs 3 of the most powerful Olympians in his many arms, and he's holding them. And Athena and Hera are both like, we give up. And only Poseidon wants to fight on. So they are these embodiments of force and power on a level that even Olympians, who could pretty much do anything, are cowed by them. So that's kind of what I have to say about the Hecatonchires. Let's see, what else do we have as far as questions? Could I do an episode on magic like Cersei and Hecate? That's a great idea. I should totally do one like that where I just kind of hit on the idea of magic as the ancient Greeks viewed it. Because Cersei, she's another character from the Odyssey, currently the star of a great novel by Madeline Miller. Cersei is described as a witch, which is a term you don't really see much in Greek mythology either. And she has these powers of transmutation. She turns Odysseus' sailors into swine, pigs. So she actually, like, there's potions and stuff. She's actually does magic. Again, this falls under the auspices of, like, Hecate and Hermes. So I should do that's a great idea for a future episode. Keep watching this space. I'll definitely be covering Cersei and Hecate. Probably together, because that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. That might be all the... can the Cyclopes eat ambrosia and bleed ichor like the gods can? Well... that's a good question. So, ambrosia, for those of you who don't know, is the food of the gods. It's said in several sources the only thing the gods eat is nectar, which is like their drink, and ambrosia, which is their food. And I think it's not in the original sources, but I think in modern days it's been discerned that, or it's been decided in some sources that ambrosia is what confers immortality onto the gods. But I feel like that's something that's more of like a modern creation, because then you can have a cool thing where somebody else eats the ambrosia and stuff. But I feel like the gods are inherently immortal, and I feel like the Cyclopes are too. Now, I suppose there would be nothing preventing them from that. And Zeus in particular and Hephaestus maintain very close relations with the Cyclopes. So I figure if they have like a big party up at Mount Olympus, everybody's like having a good time, they probably invite the Cyclopes, and it's like, oh boy, what do you got to serve? It's like, we got nectar and ambrosia. Now, of course, my Cyclopes, I designed them without mouths, so they probably just sit there and look sad, or maybe, again, they pour it in their eyes. But I feel like traditionally, in most Greek mythology, they do have mouths. So, yeah, I figure they could probably eat that. That's a great... man, these questions I get, they're so cool. It's so fun, like, kind of on the spot, bending my brain around these things. I'm like, yeah, now it makes me wish I'd given them a mouthful a bit. So maybe, right here, he's got a little tiny mouth, so you can stick a straw in there and just, like, kind of suck it up. Can I do an episode on minor gods, please? Oh, don't worry. As this continues, at this point, I think I've done an episode about all the major gods, except for Dionysus. But there's a lot of the ones I did up front I want to redo, particularly Apollo, Hermes, and Pan, because those 2 episodes got lost. I didn't tape them. I didn't know... I made a mistake. I should have been... I didn't know that you had to save it at a certain time, so they're gone. They're lost to the sands of time. And, man, there's so much to say about, like, especially Hermes and especially Apollo. I could do, like, 17 episodes just on them. But, yeah, I'll definitely be doing, like, a lot more minor gods and goddesses. It depends, though. I might have to group them up sometimes, because sometimes there's a really cool minor goddess or god who in myth or in, like, cult is really exciting, but doesn't have a lot of myths. So after I get past that, I don't have as much to say, so maybe I'll group them together. Like, the suggestion of Hecate and Cersei makes a certain amount of sense, because they're both magic users. And, you know, outside of her appearance in the Odyssey, there's not as much about Cersei. And outside of a few other scattered myths, not about Hecate. So put them together, I'll definitely be doing stuff about minor goddesses and gods. In fact, if there's anyone you really want to hear me do, I say, write to me at georgeo'connorbooks@gmail.com. It's a great place to send me any suggestions. I can't guarantee I'll do it right away, because sometimes I just have, like, there's something else I want to get out of the way first. But if it's an idea, I'll definitely take it. And also, this is a great place if you want to send me any of your drawings you do, because normally I'll start off showing drawings. So I don't know if you want to see, like, if you want to send me one of your Brontus, Argus, and Steropus, or Polyphemus, or maybe you want to draw what the Arimaspians look like, or something, please send it to me there, and I'll be happy. Then I'll show it tomorrow. Wait, anyway, I had it right, and then I messed it up. Let's take a few more. if we have any. Oh, and I didn't actually answer about if they bleed ichor. I don't know. I assume so, right? It makes sense they'd have the same stuff circulating through a system. I don't even know, honestly, if Titans bleed ichor. We know the gods do because they've been stabbed a few times. I don't know that it's actually been established anywhere else. Eleanor would love to hear about Nemesis. Yeah, okay, somebody's always asked about Nemesis. I assume it's Eleanor. Nemesis is one of those goddesses who doesn't appear a lot in myths, so I probably would have to group her together with someone. I feel like doing an episode about, like, Nemesis and Eris together, Eris, would be, like, a really great episode. So that would be a cool one to do. Eleanor, make sure you send it to me here. Write down, please do Nemesis, and your Eris idea was pretty cool, too, and I'll do an episode on that. You know, Nemesis, when I think about it, I don't think she's ever actually appeared in Olympians. So maybe I'd even have to do like a design on the spot of what I think Nemesis looks like. Okay, I do think that's probably it. So, okay. Well, excellent. What I'm going to do then, we're going to draw this episode of Geek Speaks Greek to a close. I want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. Join me back here tomorrow, Friday, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm going to do, not really sure yet. I have a few ideas, but I'm just going to kind of ruminate on who I'll be doing. But we'll have an episode, and again, I'll show your pictures, anything you send, any questions you have, I'll be happy to answer. And I'll see you all then. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day, guys.